good morning, good evening, depending on where in the world you are and what time of the day you're watching this. My name is Faith Halverson Ramos, and I'm a board certified music therapist and licensed professional counselor in Colorado in the United States. And I am happy to be interviewing my friend and music therapist colleague, Stephanie Bolton. She is the owner of Healing Sounds Music Therapy in Huntsville, Alabama. And she's also the author of the book, Diving Deeper, 30 Visualizations for Individual and Group Work. In addition to being a music therapist, she's also a fellow of the Association for Music and Imagery and is a guided imagery and music practitioner. So, welcome, Stephanie. Yay!
Thank you, Faith. Hi.
Hi. So, this is part of my idea of interviewing female musician friends to learn more about their relationship with music, what inspired them to work in some aspect of the music business, music related business. And so I'm happy to be able to speak with more of my music therapist colleagues because it's a really unique area of working with music.
Mm-hmm. I think so too, and I'm so glad that you're doing this project because I think it's so interesting. So often I feel as music therapists, we talk about other people's experiences in music and how we're able to facilitate those experiences. And it's not very often that we share or we hear about each other's experience in music and what brought us here and what we do and how we as therapists and musicians interact with the music ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. It can be easily overlooked when one is in a service or a caregiving sort of profession where the focus is and rightfully is on our client, the person we're working with. But music is such a powerful medium, and music therapy is not a profession that one just randomly goes into.
You don't stumble into it.
No, not at all. So would you like to share how you stumbled into music therapy, and then eventually we can veer into GIM?
Sure. Gosh, it seems, I don't know. Music was always part of my life. I don't remember ever not knowing music because, my mom likes to tell the story that when I was born, I wasn't crying, I was humming.
Wow.
So I know, really, really quite unusual. But, and one of my earliest memories is when I was 4 or 5 and going to piano lessons. So I started really young and was just always fascinated with the piano and with music. And I think I've always considered music as a language. Throughout many times in my life, especially those lovely teenager years. I thought music was my primary form of communication and primary mode of expression for how I felt and what I thought, the things that I wanted to say but couldn't say. So I would play them, or I would listen to that one song on repeat, in my car. My sister likes to say that she could always tell what mood I was in by which songs I chose to play on the piano that day. She would know whether it was safe or not.
Wow.
To come and talk to me based on what I was practicing. So for me, it's always just been that communication. It's a language. It's a way to say something. And so with that, growing up being so much in music, I always knew that that was just something I would do when I grew up and went off to college. So I knew music had to play a part. And in my discussions, with my parents about in high school, when you're at that age where you're supposed to choose your college, and in order to choose your college, you had to choose a major, because how else do you choose where to go? So, of course, my answer was, well, I want to major in music. And my dad, bless him, he's an engineer. He says, well, how's that going to pay the bills? You need to major in something that's going to pay the bills and get you a job when you're done, when you graduate. So I said, well, okay, how about music and psychology? I'll double major. Because I was also very interested in helping people and learning about people and what makes them tick and psychology. So I said, well, I'll double major, music and psychology. And Dad says, well, that's 6 years. I really want you out in 4. Like, well, 6 is the best I can do, Dad. So we were looking at various colleges based on that double major idea. Mm-hmm. And then one day, I don't know, universe doing its work and its magic, there was an article in the newspaper that we got about a music therapist. And so my dad read it, and he comes in my bedroom and throws it on the bed and says, 4 years. I said, well, okay, because, even with that, the music therapy, the idea sounded like the perfect marriage for what I was in my mind wanting to do. Mm-hmm. A way to incorporate music and use music in the way that subconsciously I'd been doing for myself for many years, as a way of helping other people. So I thought, oh, perfect. And 4 years. Ended up being 5, but close enough.
Close enough.
So that was 4 and 6. Stumbled into, actually my dad, we could say my dad stumbled into music therapy for me.
It was all divinely calculated.
It was. I believe that. Meant to be.
So where did you end up going to school for music therapy?
I ended up, we toured several. I lived, at the time, my parents lived in Alabama. So we toured several of the schools in the Southeast. We did the University of Alabama. I think we went to Georgia College. Tennessee Technological University at the time had a program. They no longer have a program, but they did at that time. And we went to East Carolina University as well. And I just landed on Alabama. It had the director, Carol Prickett, at the time, I don't know, it was just a really nice feeling there. It felt, of course, my parents liked it because it was a lot closer to home. I liked it because it was just far enough away. And I didn't have a car, so I couldn't go home every weekend. But it was something about it that just felt right to me. So that was where I ended up and did my undergrad there. I went on to intern in Wisconsin, which I believe is your neck of the woods.
It is. In Madison?
I did, yeah. And I lucked into that internship too. One of my classmates from Alabama was up there. And she had called me because she knew I was having a hard time finding an internship. And so she called me up in the middle of the summer and she was like, hey, do you have an internship? And I said, no, not yet. I'm sending out another round of letters. And she says, well, the girl who was supposed to come in September just backed out. This was, I think, probably middle of July. She says, do you want to come? I'm like, well, yeah. She goes, well, you better send your application in like tomorrow. So that's how I ended up in Wisconsin, the Southern girl in Wisconsin for winter.
Oh, dear.
Oh, yes. Trial by ice and snow.
For sure. Hopefully you were able to get around easily by bus.
Well, actually, where I was interning, there wasn't a stipend, but they provided us room and board.
Oh, nice.
So I got to sleep in the old hospital. That's where they sort of put the interns up. upstairs from the old morgue.
Wow.
So it was actually a really nice setup. So I only maybe drove my car once or twice a week. Luckily, I did not need to get an engine block heater that winter. Because on the days my car didn't start, I just decided I wasn't going to go anywhere. So, and work was right there. So I didn't have to use my car if I didn't really need to.
Nice.
So it really worked out very nicely, yes.
That sounds like an ideal internship arrangement.
It was. It really was.
Which is not always
right.
the case.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other topic of conversation.
A whole other webinar.
Yeah, for sure. So then you graduated with your master's or your bachelor's, but then you continued on to get your master's.
Well, because there weren't any at the time. I could count the number of music therapists in the state of Alabama on one hand.
Wow.
So I knew there weren't really many job prospects here. So I knew that I needed to go where there were better employment opportunities. And so the Northeast had a ton of music therapists. So I ended up landing in Rochester, New York.
Even colder.
Actually, it wasn't colder, but it was snowier. Wisconsin, I spent, I think, most of the month of January below zero. Which is so much fun for a Southern girl. Rochester hardly ever got below zero, but they got probably twice as much snow. But I stayed there for 10 years, and while I was there, did a distance program for my master's, because at the time, I feel like that's the story of my life. At the time, what I wanted to do wasn't available, but then shortly after I leave, it becomes available. So I don't know if that means I'm ahead of the curve or behind the curve.
That's a good question.
Half full, half empty.
But it is interesting how your journey has this underlying current of guidance and direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really does. And I think there have been times when I'm more aware of that than others. Definitely times where I make up my own mind about what I'm going to do. And that usually doesn't work out as well as I hope. And the times when I sort of rely more on that inner guidance, divine guidance, whatever people want to call it, when I rely more on that, then things tend to work out better and come easier. So I'm sure there's a lesson in that. But I do know that all along there has been that undercurrent, as you said, of something else dragging me along sometimes.
Allowing you to dive deeper.
Right. Yes.
So then for those who may be listening who are familiar with music therapy, but maybe aren't familiar with guided imagery and music, then that's this whole other level of in-depth study.
Yeah, and that was something, honestly, I really did stumble into and had no idea that that's what it was. And because I was in my undergrad training, if we talked about GIM, I don't remember it. At the time when I was at Alabama, our undergraduate training was very focused on behavioral interventions. And so I'm sure that we learned about Nordhoff-Robbins, and I don't even think neurologic music therapy was, this would have been the mid-90s. So I don't know that NMT was really that popular or that well-known or even that well-organized at that point. I do remember that we talked about Nordhoff-Robbins, but it was one of those music therapy schools of thought that was kind of out there. So when you're coming from that behavior, that highly behavioral point of view, everything else is sort of out there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yay.
so I don't know if, yeah, I don't know if I'd heard of GIM at that point or if they talked about Helen Bonny. I don't remember if they did. So I'd taken, it was just before I even started my master's degree, and I was auditing a master's class at Nazareth College in Rochester. I think it was psychology of music, just because I thought, you know, gee, that sounds interesting, and why don't I audit it? So I did. And I can remember towards the end of the semester, Brian Hunter was teaching the course. And at the end of the semester, he had us, I think it was like right before finals. And we had this class where he told us it was, we were to bring in pillows and blankets. And he was like, it's going to be this relaxation thing. I don't even remember him saying it was going to be GIM or anything. And what he ended up doing was talking us through like a real modified GIM experience. And it blew my mind. And I had no idea what it was. Thankfully, it was a good sort of blowing my mind. But I had no idea what it was. I had no idea, you know, really if what I had experienced was normal or out of the ordinary or to be expected, or if it was just wild and crazy. I had no idea. And we didn't really even talk about it in class afterwards.
Wow.
He opened it up and said, you know, does anyone want to talk about what you thought? And because all of us were musicians, we ended up talking about, you know, well, this is the kind of music it was. And it was real surface level kind of discussion. You know, I liked it. I didn't like it. It reminded me of this.
Yeah.
Very cerebral. Right. And I was like, okay, so maybe I was the only one who had a mind-blowing experience, right? And I'm not the kind of person who's going to raise my hand and say, you know, yo, right, yeah. No, I'm going to sit in the corner and say, yeah, that was nice. I enjoyed that. So I sort of carried that around for several years with me, wondering, you know, gosh, what was that? And it wasn't until I was in grad school, and part of the distance training at St. Mary of the Woods is we had 1 week of GIM level 1 as a summer intensive. And Lisa Summer taught us. And again, I was like, okay, 1, now I know what this is. 2, I know it can change your life in 20 minutes, the length of a program.
Wow.
And that was really what set me on that GIM path. And it was years, probably 6 or 7 years after that. No, I guess not that long, 4 years, I think, after my level 1 experience, that I had the opportunity to do level 2. And as soon as it came up, I was like, yes. Clicked yes on that email, sent it back and said, how do I sign up and how much money do you want? And when is this going to happen so I can put it on my calendar? And oddly enough, here's another example of that guidance going on. The first level 2 I signed up for ended up being canceled. And I'd already paid all the money and signed up, you know, blocked it off on my calendar and everything. And for a variety of reasons, it wasn't going to happen. And so I thought, well, you know, I've already paid. Surely there's another level 2 happening somewhere, anywhere. So I go online and I'm looking around, and I don't even remember what I Google searched for it. But at the time I was living in Phoenix and found a level 2 training that was going to happen almost the same exact week that my original level 2 was going to happen in Virginia. So in addition to the undercurrent of guidance that happens in my life, there's the undercurrent of traveling.
I can relate to that.
Yes. So I emailed the primary trainer and said, hey, how do I sign up? I need to do this level 2. Need to do this level 2. And,
Caps.
can I still sign up? And she's like, oh yeah, we'd love to have you, and it'd be great. And so I was flying from Phoenix to, where did I fly? Just somewhere in Virginia, for that level 2 week. And it was amazing and really incredible. Probably amplified by the fact that, when you fly anywhere east from Phoenix, it requires red eyes. So I think I had been awake for 48 hours going into the level 2 training. So I was already like crazy altered.
Yeah. Wow.
I need no induction. It was really amazing though. We were at this wonderful place next to a river. It was nice. And so that was how I got hooked into it's now the Atlantis Training Institute. It used to be Mid-Atlantic. Okay. They went through a name change a few years ago. But that was how I got hooked into them for all of the remaining of my GIM training. And finished up. It took about 4 years from level 2 to graduation to finish that, which I think is about normal. I think there are a few master's music therapy programs that roll the GIM training in with the master's.
Oh, wow.
So it still takes, you usually say 3 to 4, 5 years sometimes, depending on how the trainings get scheduled. And when you complete all the work. There's a lot of work.
Could you say a little more about what guided imagery in music is?
Yes. GIM was discovered, by Helen Bonney, and she was a music therapist, violinist, practicing. I believe she started practicing back in the 70s. She was working as a music therapist at the Maryland Psychiatric Institute. I'm going to get that name wrong. Yes. And she was part of the time when they were doing the LSD studies with the long-term acute psychiatric patients. And for those who don't know, the LSD studies, they would give measured doses of LSD to the patients at the hospital. And their theory was that by helping them go on controlled trips, they could help them process through their psychological problems and issues and the stuff that was going on and the reasons that they were stuck in the hospital. That using the drug, they could manage that and help them process through those things. So what would happen was they would give them the LSD, and Helen Bonney would play music. And what they found was after a certain point, the LSD studies were no longer approved. They decided that was not a good idea.
That's beginning to change in some areas, thanks to the works of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies.
But at the time, they said LSD bad, no more LSD. And so what Helen discovered was that she could continue playing the music and elicit very similar responses from the patients in terms of the imagery and the consciousness experience that they would have to music was very much the same as what they would have to the LSD. So she started working with that and studying that more and created these beautiful classical music programs geared towards very specific kind of emotional states. And I believe there are not quite 20 Helen Bonney programs. There have been others created since then. There are lots of people who still create them now. But I believe there are 18, 19 Bonney programs. And so she created this whole sort of protocol around using her playlists, her music programs, to help people process through mental health issues.
And each playlist has a theme or a title, or
I think of them, yes, they're very much themed. They're thematic. I think of them as different emotions. And they have names. So, we sort of know some of the early programs that, let me back up. With each level of training, you get more programs.
I see.
So in level 1, I think there are 3 or 4 programs that you learn and you get. And they're very basic level programs, very on the surface, very broad. Typically, I use them with new clients or someone who's coming to me for, the first few sessions. Part of it is because it's not going to blow them out of the water. Their head's not going to explode with a level 1 program. But it also gives them a chance to get used to the process of how to journey, which is what we call it in GIM, how to travel, and how to sort of acclimate to the music and the imagery experience. So often people just don't know, which is really very interesting to me because I think I have always traveled to music, not knowing that's what it was. I mean, I can remember in high school band during concert season, when there's so much to do. And our band director he incorporated some like music appreciation into band. And so we'd have to write papers. So you'd have to, pick a piece of classical music and write a paper about it. And so I can remember writing these papers, but, half of it would be imagery. When I hear this Tchaikovsky symphony, this is what it makes me think of. So I was doing that in my own head for a long time. And it's interesting to me that other people don't do that.
Well, like you were sharing about your relationship with music, you've been creating playlists for a long time and using music as a means of expression.
An emotional expression.
Yeah.
Especially in those teenage years when so many emotions are happening and, depending on your own level of self-awareness, you may or may not know what the heck is going on. Yeah. And so oftentimes when I was feeling really emotional, I would sit at the piano and just play something. And so it got to where I sort of filed music in my head based on when would I play this? Would I play this song when I'm really angry? Would I play this song when I'm heartbroken? Would I play this song when I'm just feeling bleh? And that was how I filed things. And I see a lot of similarity in the GIM programs like that. That they're sort of filed in a similar way for an emotional state. And there are subtle differences between the programs. I mean, there are probably 4 or 5 that are for grief or depression, which to many people would be the same thing. Yeah. But there are real subtle differences within the playlists of nuances of, you can be depressed and have no energy. You can be depressed and be angry. You can be in a grieving place that's full of frustration and questions. But that's different than a grieving place where you're sad but accepting of what you've lost. Yeah. And so there are a lot of those real subtle nuances in the music to listen to. And that pulls that out of us.
Beautiful. It sounds like, I mean, I've heard of GIM being really powerful work. And I haven't really experienced a session with someone who wasn't at some level of their training.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yes.
So, I haven't experienced quite that degree of mind-blowing that you described. But it makes me wonder, are there people for whom this approach is ideal? and people who maybe it's too much?
Yes. It's, the qualifier I usually put on GIM is the contraindication that most of us are trained to know is that one, people need to know the difference between fantasy and reality. So, for someone who's acutely psychotic, probably not a good idea because they already struggle with knowing what's real and what's not real. So, that's like the one big red flag. Otherwise, I find people, I have had people come to see me for GIM, and after 3 or 4 sessions, it was just not the thing for them. Either, and through no fault of theirs or mine, it just wasn't going to be the right approach. But I think they just weren't quite ready for it. And open-minded enough for it, because it is very different for those who are used to a more traditional talk therapy setup. That GIM is a little bit different than that. And so for some people who are maybe expecting a more traditional, I come in and talk and maybe we listen a little and then we talk some more, that this is different. Doesn't quite fit that mold. And so it wasn't working for them. I've had other people who, second session blow their mind and aren't quite sure what to do about that, which is also why GIM needs to be done with someone who's trained. Because you can find the playlists online, they're listed. You can buy the books, the GIM books, and they've got all the playlists listed, and you can create your own program. But it can be touchy